Okay, so yeah, it's funny. I always think of it as being so exotic, but most people know it very well. So.
Are we good, Kelly? All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the June 2024 meeting of the Davis Police Accountability Commission. Let's go ahead. We have not a full deck here, so let's go ahead and do roll call so to make sure everyone's microphone is working. We want to start on fifth again, Commissioner.
Sure, John Myers, present.
Commissioner Escamilla Greenwald.
Present.
Vice Chair Griswold.
Present.
And myself, I'm present. Let's see. Does anyone want to make a motion to approve the agenda for this evening?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Sure.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, agenda approved. Brief announcements from staff, Kelly.
So behind me, you see Angela Wilson, who is the newest, or will soon be the newest member of the Police Accountability Commission. She was appointed as the alternate by council at their last meeting and will start with the commission on July 1. So, Angela, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you want to come up and just kind of formally introduce yourself for the record and say a little bit about who you are?
Hi, pleased to meet you guys. History, I live just across the street, so I'm within walking distance, and I've been in town for about 20-something years, basically from Yuba City area, not from, but ended up there. And I was on the Human Relations Commission prior to this one, so I'm really excited to work with you guys. Do you have any questions?
Welcome.
You're on the community advisory.
I am, yes.
Maybe if you could explain a little bit of what that is. Yes.
Okay, so the Community Advisory Board is neighborhood representation. So that basically what we do is the chief announces sort of what's going on and then informs us of any issues or any concerns. But most of it has to do with him coming in and checking with us to find out what issues we may have. Old North issue right now is all parking because of all the new construction that's going on. I was also on the committee that, I think it was called the 7-Eleven committee for the school across the street. Hate to see it being taken down, and if I had my choice, I would have basically I would not have been in favor of it, but I understand, you know, all the issues with it, so it will be at some point sold and removed, and there will be something put in there. And then, of course, there's the Hibbert thing that's going on. So basically, we deal with predominantly neighborhood things, and there's representation from all the different, many of the different neighborhoods in the town.
And is it like neighborhood public safety concerns or?
Everything.
Okay.
I mean, so again, like we've had issues with people breaking in and different kinds of things, and I represent Old North and take in Old North information. So I'm on the Old North board also, so I have an opportunity to be very clear of what's going on in our neighborhood, and then learn about things that are going on and other things. And in fact, sometimes when there are issues, I did go through the webpage and read all the various different complaints that the police department has gotten and have gone through. I read probably 90% of them. And in the reading, some of those things were actually brought forth to these meetings more to let us know as a neighborhood to be concerned about these things, and so that if anybody in our neighborhood asks what's going on, we have some information to provide. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay,
Welcome.
thank you. I look forward to working with you all.
Yes.
And then the two other comments, you have two, you received, well, there are two comments related to the military equipment ordinance. One is an email that you received from Connor Gorman earlier today. Another is a post that Robert Canning asked that I make you aware of on davisite.org. It was a post related to the military equipment, and then he provided a response to that. So that's all that I have.
Thank you. Announcements from commissioners. Any commissioner announcements? I usually take at least these two, point out our sort of monthly acknowledgments, and of course, as I am very exhausted and dehydrated, I know it is Pride Month here, well, not just here in Davis, but I think it's important as we sort of think about Pride Month and its sort of relationship to the mandate of this commission that there is still a you know, we often focus on disparities related to different ethnic minorities with respect to policing and law enforcement more broadly. But of course, different sorts of demographic groups, including folks in the LGBTQ+ community, find different tragic disparities in law enforcement and policing specifically. Most particularly at this moment in time in our country, transgender people find themselves dramatically overrepresented in terms of incidents of violence and death while in you know, police and law enforcement custody. And so as we are trying to fulfill our mandate to look after the interests of the most vulnerable people in our community, I think we should keep some of those folks in the LGBTQ+ community in our mind as we're trying to recommend the best and most just policy to the Davis City Council, as we are responsible to do.
Chairman,
Yes, please. Go
yeah, thank you for mentioning the LGBTQ community and that we're recognizing them this month. I also want to say it is an honor to live in a city like Davis that is very welcoming and accepting and inclusive of the LGBTQ community, Q+ community. However, as our chair mentioned, they're still marginalized, not only by law enforcement at times, not all, but sometimes, and also, unfortunately, members of the community that are not welcoming and inclusive. And so I think I concur with you, it's important that we remember that we're very fortunate to live in a community like Davis that is welcoming. However, there are still incidents that occur. So we want to encourage people to keep your eyes open, and if you see something, say something, report it to law enforcement. We don't want to be silent. We want to continue to be an inclusive community. Thank you.
Thank you. And you know, I'm not going to get too deep into this, but some of y'all know that security was my job for Davis Pride this year. And you know, this is only the second year in, you know, our 10-year history of doing Davis Pride that we've had to hire you know, security teams to be at the Pride Festival because of concerns from various transphobic and, you know, homophobic groups in our community. And we had, you know, a local agitator, well known. I'm not even, you know, I don't need to name names, but you know, a local agitator, well known in this community, show up before the event had even technically begun. So also before our security had arrived, you know, recording people with her cell phone, you know, getting into people's space, harassing them with, you know, questions and things like that. And so, you know, you bring up an important point in terms of the degree to which, you know, just regular civilians in our community can kind of create a security and lack of public safety situation for folks in our community. And that's a situation where, you know, sometimes minority and aggrieved communities especially need to be able to call on and be able to expect the response of law enforcement when they find themselves in those kind of situations. So, you know, important things for us to keep in our minds as we're making our policy anyway. I see that our council liaison is not here, so I will, she is also, I assume, very tired from this weekend. But I'll skip forward to public comment, or general public comment. Any general public comment to the commission on items not on our agenda? I will take it back to the commission for our consent calendar. Does anyone want to make a motion or correction to our minutes from the May 6th meeting? Does anyone want to make a motion for approval of those minutes?
I'll make a motion.
Is there a second?
Yes.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. Any abstentions? Motion passes. All right. I just actually a question on that, Kelly. So will, you know, within those minutes are contained the recommendation that we made at the last commission meeting, and that'll go for, I just want to confirm, you know, my understanding of the next sort of flow here, that'll go to the council at some point, you know, on their agenda for review and consideration. Do we have any idea as to, you know, what the possible timing of that could be?
No, I don't have an idea of timing yet, so at this point, what I do is I take it to the city manager, he works with the council members, et cetera, to schedule, put things on the long range and schedule. So once I have an idea, I will certainly let you guys know.
We have a break in July, is that correct?
August.
August, yeah. So they have, they have 2 meetings in July and then break in August.
Thank you. Let's see, moving on to our much awaited police auditor, police policy audit on hiring practices. I'll go ahead and take it away or give it away to our able auditors.
Thank you, Chair Orton. This is interesting because I haven't been here in a while and I'm used to doing this over Zoom, so it's hard to recalibrate. Yeah, so we are going to give you sort of a broad overview of what's in the report, which was obviously provided to you ahead of time. Hope you had a chance to at least take a look at it. This was not just solely my project. I worked very closely with my colleague Steve Connolly on this one. So I'm going to first turn it over to Steve, and I will then follow up with some closing remarks. But Steve, do you want to just get us started on talking about how this came to be, what you learned, what you did, and what were the conclusions of the report?
Thank you, Mike, and good evening, Chair Horton and members of the commission. I'm Steve Connolly, and I have been with you in person a couple times. I've been in the city of Davis a few times in the last year, and like Mike, have seen some of your meetings on Zoom, but this is the first alignment of presence and meetings, so I'm very happy to be with you. And thank you for your patience. This report was a little bit of a long time coming, and it was for some interesting reasons, just in terms of some of the dynamics that really related to recruiting and hiring as they were playing out in real time. It was sort of a fast-forwarded version for me of some of the ups and downs and the challenges that go along with this. So I want to, we basically started this project last summer at the request of one of your subcommittees, and it certainly is a topic that has been very much a prominent one in terms of national law enforcement concerns. So we have done this, a similar kind of project, looking at the specifics of the dynamics of recruiting and hiring with several of the different jurisdictions that we work in, and we were very happy to take a look under the hood at the process in Davis and the ways that it's similar and different than other places. And when we started, things were very promising with regard to the hiring and recruiting landscape here. The first time I met with the department's upper management, they were basically in terrific position. They had maybe just 1 or 2 vacancies, and there were people in the pipeline getting ready to fill those vacancies, and they felt like it was effectively a seller's market. They felt like they were in a desirable position, and they had a lot of viable candidates that they were able to choose from, to the point that they were really focusing almost exclusively on lateral hires from other agencies, which there, as the report says, there are a lot of advantages to that in terms of the people obviously having been through the police academy, for example, so that the department or the city wouldn't have the expense of that. And also, obviously, a lot of relevant experience and a track record that the department could use to evaluate their suitability for being in Davis. So things were very, very promising at the time in terms of some of the variables that affect hiring and recruiting. The compensation package was considered to be sort of, right in the middle of the market and certainly competitive with surrounding areas, so that was an area that they felt pretty good about. And I felt like this was just going to be a breeze. And so we have put some drafts together. This is probably the 7th draft that Kelly's had to navigate her way through. And interestingly enough, we spent some time working through issues, we wanted to actually take a look at some background investigations. So we did that in the fall, some completed background investigations to get more of a detailed sense of how that process works. And so those are obviously very sensitive and confidential, and it was great that we were able to do that with the department's cooperation. And then by the time we were ready to put something together and circulate it with you folks, the chief said, well, hey, everything you said sounds great, but things, a lot has changed, and in some ways, it just goes to show you that the ground can shift under your feet pretty quickly. And the department has 60 sworn positions. It's budgeted for 60 officers, and relatively speaking, that's smaller than many of the agencies that we work with. It's larger than a lot of local law enforcement agencies. But when you have a team of 60 people, it doesn't take much for a staffing situation to arise. And I think when he first reached out to me, he said, we're down about 6 people right now and anticipating some retirement. So we're scrambling a little bit. We've actually changed our orientation. And he also said that in terms of the way some of the neighboring communities had changed their compensation packages to make them more attractive, and lateral officers being less inclined to want to move, they weren't getting the same pool of people to choose from, and it was a little bit more of a buyer's market for them than it had been. And so they were kind of scrambling to adjust to that a little bit. So I mentioned that at the outset just to show you that these things can change very, very quickly. And I think I'll start by saying that in our view, and I hope the report reflects that, the fundamentals of the department's process are very sound, I think, in ways that I hope will be reassuring to you. The department's priorities in terms of what they're looking for and the extent to which they emphasize recruiting and hiring with a recognition of just how important it is. They go about it in a way that I think is commensurate with the public's expectations and your expectations for the quality of person, the kind of candidate that they're looking for. And at the same time, it doesn't behoove anybody to get too comfortable when it comes to this kind of thing, because so much can change so quickly just based on variables that obviously the department and the city has limited control over. So taking a pretty good sized step back, the whole, as I said before, Mike and I have focused on this topic in a lot of different places. And it has certainly been one of the critical issues in national law enforcement for several years now. Dating back to, I would say, the 2014, 2015, the whole first wave of the police, the kind of the latest police reform movement in the aftermath of the Ferguson death of Michael Brown, and that whole first focus, that intense national focus on police reform. And then obviously in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder in 2020, and again, a massive focus on injustices in law enforcement and policing and reform issues. The ability of agencies to meet their hiring needs was severely challenged by just the fact that a lot fewer people were interested in law enforcement as a profession for a variety of different reasons. And that creates kind of a vicious cycle, because when you have fewer qualified candidates to choose from, are you lowering your standards in ways that are potentially problematic? And so obviously, and I think very understandably, a lot of scrutiny has been placed. So part of it was the shortage of officers, and the other part of it was, again, with this renewed focus on policing and police reform, can we be doing anything differently? There's been renewed attention to what is a decades or generations old problem of gender, race, and ethnicity diversity within law enforcement, and trying to make sure that departments are representative of the communities that they are serving. So that's the backdrop. Now, I will tell you that the Davis situation is not as good now as it was last July, but it is certainly far from being precipitous, certainly relative to some of the other places where we have worked, and some of the other places that we are familiar with in the state of California and other parts of the country as well. I was just talking to Mike, we did a couple of different projects in the city of Vallejo a few years ago, and they were just in the news. They have struggled for years with staffing problems for a variety of reasons. And I looked at a news article from a week or two ago where they are budgeted for 132 officers, and they have 31 in their current lineup. So obviously they are having to reach out to other agencies for assistance with, which is they're down. I'm no math wizard, but that is an untenable situation, obviously, for public safety. And even when we were working there 4 or 5 years ago, the staffing shortages were having a lot of impacts on mandatory overtime, and the officers were just kind of ground down, burnt out. It was a very discouraging environment all around. So Davis' situation is very, very different. A smaller agency, and one where I think there is a recognition that in many ways Davis is an appealing place to work. And it was interesting, in terms of talking about some of the Davis-specific things that we learned, different agencies have different approaches to how they staff recruiting and hiring. Everybody recognizes it as an issue, but some have dedicated personnel that's their job. And it's obviously with larger agencies, they're more at liberty to do that. But the chief and deputy chief have that on their desk every day as something that they themselves are going to be engaged with and paying attention to. It matters that much. And as the report says, that they're able to do it is a sign that they don't have very many vacancies, right? They're not so overwhelmed by the need that we don't have time to keep up with it all. But that they care enough and that they're committed to doing it in that way rather than just delegating it, I think is a sign of a recognition of how much it matters. And in terms of just kind of learning a little bit about how it works here in Davis, my sense is that what the chief said to me on a few occasions, and it makes sense, they have relied a lot on word of mouth. Their own folks are generally pretty happy to be here, which is a really nice thing to be able to say. And so he said they are our best recruiters, because not only are they saying positive things about the community and about the agency, but they are also kind of pre-screening, like, hey, I think you would be great for this. I know you, and I know what kind of person you are, and what kind of priorities as a police officer you would want to have. I think this would be a good fit for you. So there's been a nice synergy as far as all of that has been concerned. So I would encourage you, if you haven't seen it, the department's video, the recruiting video on the website is really, really well done, and really does reflect an emphasis on community and diversity and contributing to the city of Davis in ways, I'm not going to say that are untraditional, but not, hey, look at us rappelling down from a helicopter and here's our SWAT team jumping out of the armored vehicle. Those things are obviously an important part of public safety and law enforcement, but the department is not going to be focusing on that and saying, hey, these are the people that we're most interested in attracting. So it's well worth taking a look at. So what basically happens is that the chief and the deputy chief will screen applications. If they feel like they have a viable candidate based on the initial information, they will talk to that person pretty early on, which again is very distinct. Lots of times you don't get to meet the chief until you've been through all the hoops and been through the screening and the testing and everything else. In Davis, they want to meet you at the beginning to see so that they can communicate to you what some of the expectations are, and so that they obviously can get a more of a detailed feel for the candidate. And if it's a hit in both directions, then the process begins from there. And it is a fairly elaborate one. And Davis, like all agencies, Davis is going to have a very active role in it. But a lot of the particulars of the screening and background process for new police officers is dictated by the state. The Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission out of Sacramento really does regulate every police agency in California, and they are the ones that have imposed a lot of the particulars that go into screening people. They know what the disqualifiers are, and they have set those standards, and they have templates in terms of questionnaires that people fill out and things that they are looking for in terms of evaluating the suitability of somebody to be a police officer. So there's a personal, they have to go through an initial physical and academic testing, proficiency testing basically, and if they make it through that, then all candidates are expected to fill out a personal history statement, and that template is provided by Post out of Sacramento. It's very, very detailed. It's actually available online. You could see, any member of the public could see all the particular things that you're expected to fill out as a candidate to become a police officer. Your entire personal history, education history, relationship history, all the different jobs that you've had, a lot of different references that you're supposed to be referring, the different addresses that you've lived at, and that becomes the foundation for the further background screening that is done by a professional third party. In Davis, some departments have their own investigator that goes through the backgrounds and follows up on them. Davis uses a third party contractor and I think it's generally the same person that they have a lot of confidence in and has a good relationship, knows what the chief is looking for. We'll tell the chief pretty early in the process, hey, we have a little bit of a red flag here, so we're not going to waste time if it doesn't look like it's going to be a successful candidacy. So I think that relationship is beneficial. They go through that entire process, and if they basically put together a very, very detailed package that the chief and deputy chief are then going to review. And there, as I said before, there are certain disqualifiers that's it. Even if the department thought the person was terrific, they wouldn't be eligible under California rules to be peace officers. But then there's a certain amount of latitude and sort of judgment that agencies are expected to, or allowed, or expected to exercise in terms of, hey, there's some interesting things here. How do we feel about this candidate? It might be perfect for another agency, but is that person going to be good for us? There's a certain amount of individual judgment that goes into it as well. So my sense is that in the city of Davis, again, historically, they deal with a certain amount of good times, bad times, like every business, every organization does, whether that's budgetary or just circumstantial with the people that they have or things that are going on. But it's certainly not the massive changes. It's, we might have good periods. July 2023, we might be humming along. June of 2024, we might be a little bit more challenged and working a little bit harder to fill spots that were filled, without any question last year. But overall, I think that the perspective is that they feel like they have an attractive agency. They feel like people are happy to work here, and that they are pretty good about, identifying and slotting in people that are going to be effective. And as far as community issues and concerns, certainly my sense from talking to the chief and the deputy chief was that the get it factor was certainly very appropriate. They recognize that diversity within the personnel in the agency is a desirable feature, and that is kind of in front of mind as they are thinking about candidates and thinking about ways that they can promote the agency and some of the different strategies that may become necessary as they continue to adapt. Now, just as we were about to come up with a finished draft that we felt great about, I'm sure all of you are aware of the wrinkle that emerged in the news 4 or 5 weeks ago with regard to a gap in the screening process that had led to a person being hired who had a fairly significant relevant incident from his past that did not come up during the screening. And the department became aware of it after the fact, after he'd been working for the agency for a while. That person is no longer with the agency, and the chief, we met with the chief to talk about this specifically, and he was very candid about it, and I think he took responsibility for it and worked to address the situation, certainly with regard to the specifics of that individual case, but more broadly, like, wow, how did this happen, right? Because I just spent 10 minutes telling you how exhaustive and impressive the screening process is, and this was a fairly significant gap that was exposed. And some of it was a little bit fluky. I'll have Mike talk a little bit more about it and what on a going forward basis, what adaptations of it have already happened. But again, just kind of a humbling reminder that you can never be too sure about all of this stuff. And one last thing that I want to mention before I turn it over to Mike, to talk about some of the recommendations in the report as well. One of the things that is relatively new, but that they understand is an issue is the social media component, and that is absolutely scrubbed as part of the background process to make sure that people are not, don't have affiliations or backgrounds that are problematic as far as extremist views or any of the things that are concerning and that have come to light, particularly in the last few years. So thank you for all your attention. Mike said you have 3.5 minutes. Give me your best stuff. I think I went over. I went over time, but I'll turn it over to Mike to finish up.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, so the incident that made the media, just to emphasize what Steve said, but it came about as a result of somebody who had connected the name of the officer who had actually been commended for, I think, taking a gun off the street, and connected that with an incident that occurred in Sacramento years ago, when this fellow was working as a security guard. But as a chief, and that individual who sort of connected the dots and essentially came to the conclusion that this person, now working at Davis PD, had been involved in this earlier incident that involved the use of force, resulting in a significant settlement in Sacramento when the individual was employed as a security officer years before. Made that connection, reached out to the chief. The chief verified what this individual had concluded, and as a result of recognition that this new information made it very difficult, if not impossible, for this individual to continue in Davis, made, in our view, the right call and caused this person to no longer be with the Davis Police Department. The larger issue, as Steve indicated, just for emphasis, was how did this happen? How did the screening that the chief talked glowingly about when we first met with him, how did this person slip through the cracks? And it gets quite technical, but essentially, while there had been diligence and there had been Google searches, and I think they actually used the Google search engine of this individual and this individual's name, there were two aspects that made that more complicated and caused the information about this incident in Sacramento, which had been reported to some degree in the Sacramento Bee, I think in particular, to not turn out during this media search or Google search, which is something that is done as a matter of course with every applicant these days. What was learned was this individual used different names at different times in his career. I don't think that was intentional, that he was changing his name to avoid discovery. but that was a complication. And I think the greater complication is that, and I didn't know this, but now I do, that search engines, depending on which one you use, highlight or identify individuals in different ways, depending on the way in which the information is sent out over the internet. So what I learned, and I think the chief learned this as well, is that if you just do a Google search on somebody's name, Google does not like to put at the top of their list. They like to put sponsors at the very top of their list, all right? But beyond that preference for sponsors, they do not like to include particularly media outlets or other outlets that have paywalls. And the Bee is very aggressive about their paywall. So is the New York Times, so are some of the other publications. But the Bee, unlike even the, certainly the Vanguard doesn't have a paywall. And even the Enterprise has a paywall, but not as restrictive a paywall as the Bee does. And so that was another one of the reasons why this didn't show up on that initial search. So the chief immediately instituted new protocols and is going to require that background investigator to use a lot of the search engines that I almost never use, but apparently Bing doesn't have that same qualification. Yahoo doesn't have that same qualification, and will more fairly report out hits by any media publication, including those with paywalls. That's something I didn't know, and now I know. And as we go about our other business, we're going to let our other clients know that that is a potential problem. In any event, that changed the protocols. The chief also did what we think was necessary, and that is to, unfortunately, remove this individual from the service of the police department. And interestingly enough, he had been doing fine, but the liability there was just too great. So he's no longer with the department. And it's unfortunate, because this is why this needs to be caught earlier on in the cycle, so you don't have a situation where somebody comes on board, is already starting to be successful, and then now has, imagine how that conversation went, saying, you're doing great, but we learned about this, and now we think we can keep you. Tough conversation. Yes?
Is this an okay time for questions, or you want us to wait till the end?
You can jump in.
I was just curious about that process too. I mean, the search engine being one thing, but I would imagine on the forms people would be filling out, or this personal history statement, wouldn't they have asked, like, have you been involved in a situation that was, XYZ, describe the situation that he had been involved in as a security guard? That part surprised me.
Yeah. And we looked at the questionnaire that Steve referenced, and it's not very clear, about that. I mean, it talks about, have you ever been sued for domestic violence or a civil lawsuit or this and that. And while there was a lawsuit, it settled fairly quickly, and this individual wasn't deposed, so he wasn't very involved in that civil litigation, even though he was part of the reason for the eventual settlement. If that makes sense. So, interesting thing.
Any questions?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you to both you and Steve for, providing the background on this and for explaining the process also, Steve. I had a question. When you talk about recruitment, does the department work directly either with the academy out of West Sacramento or other similar academies for recruitment purposes?
So what I would tell you is it depends, which is my classic lawyer fallback answer. So they, in terms of recruiting, their general situation is they have not had to play an active role in terms of recruiting, because it's not like they're trying to fill 75 spots or they're expecting 50 retirements. So They do have relationships with different academies, and that's certainly a strategy. I think one of the things that we took away from it is the need to be adaptable, right? So if this isn't working, then what can or should you be doing differently? And we've worked with other agencies, for example, that they were very, very intent on raising their profile with certain kind of historically underrepresented groups. So it's like, okay, what can or should we be doing differently? And they started targeting the different organizations at colleges that were specifically the Black Student Union or what have you, that were particularly focused on a group that they wanted to connect with in a new way. So the short answer is, yes, they certainly recognize that keeping abreast of what's going on at the academies, but those are people who are sometimes paying their own way, whereas a lot of candidates ideally are going to have an agency sponsor them. An agency is already interested enough in them that they're going to pay for their tuition and kind of sponsor them during the time that they're doing those. I think it's like 25, 30 weeks. It's a long process. So I hope that's helpful. But yeah, I think the one thing I want to reinforce from your question is, yes, being adaptable and targeting areas where you think, this might be a rich environment to meet a lot of different people and let people know about the Davis Police Department, that's absolutely on the mind of the agency.
And so given that, is that the case where they have sponsors too? Because I wanted to do a follow-up and ask, do they reach out to community colleges? Because I know community colleges have some programs as well. Is that the same thing? Sometimes they have sponsors, and so they wouldn't necessarily reach out, or how does that work?
So when you say, if you could just explain what you mean about that, maybe I didn't explain the sponsor concept. What did you mean when you said they have sponsors?
I know community colleges have, they offer programs in law enforcement. And so by sponsors, I understood you to mean that, let's say they're recruiting from a particular group. They might say, hey, if you go through this program or this training academy, we will pay for you to go through, we'll pay the X amount of thousands of dollars it costs if you come to work with us afterwards. Is that what you mean by sponsorship?
So yeah, in other words, let's say that they were very interested, and I'll give you a very specific example from within the department. They have at times reached out to civilian employees who already are working for the department, so the department has a sense of them as a person and has a sense of their work ethic and have hey, are you interested in a career in law enforcement? And they have encouraged them. And if that's the case, and if they are inviting the person to become a member of the agency, then they will pay for that as part of the recruitment and attraction process. They're going to basically hire the person and pay for them to go to the academy.
Okay, great, thank you. Thanks.
I'm just going to end our opening remarks by just talking through the recommendations and why we made them. Davis, like virtually every other community, has up until now largely deferred the decisions about who to hire and who to look for to the police department. And that is a paradigm that exists to this day in most agencies and cities. But what we'd like, what our recommendations speak to is trying to get more community involvement and community engagement and community voices with regard to what we think is the most important decision a chief is making, which is ideally this person is going to come on board and provide public safety for 20 or more years in this organization and for this city, and that is a heavy decision to make. Probably the most important investigation I often tell when we teach class on civil liability is the decision on who to hire or who not to hire. And that's why once this person's past incident was found out, why this person really couldn't stay. To that point, though, more and more police professionals recognize that there could be they could gain some insight on who they should be looking for by having more conversations with those who are in the community and invested in this issue particularly. And so our first recommendation is really to suggest that the committee, we can help with this if you'd like, but the committee come up with a list of attributes that they think would be the kinds of attributes you'd be looking for if you were the chief and if you were making the decision on candidate A versus candidate B versus candidate C. And even if it's a bullet point, one-page outline of these are the qualities that we think would work in Davis or would be a great fit for Davis Public Safety, I think that would be beneficial to the chief and deputy chief to see. And that's essentially recommendation 1. Recommendation 2 is related to that. And we've talked to the chief about it, and he's agreeable to doing this if you all are agreeable to doing it, which is we think that when the chief makes the decision on hiring an applicant, and the applicant accepts that offer, that as part of the onboarding process, and we didn't get into the onboarding process, but there's a very extensive onboarding process. You know, the applicant is then brought on board. He or she is attached to a field training officer who then is got a responsibility not only to teach him how policing is going to be practiced in Davis, and even if it's a tenured officer, they still go through this process because they need to learn the Davis way, which may be different than the West Sac way or the way in Woodland, or even the sheriff's office. So as part of that process, we think it would be helpful for that new officer to know a little bit about what you all are doing as a police accountability commission. We also think the community advisory board would also be a good place to have somebody from that board also participate on that onboarding process. And I'm not suggesting it's going to be an interview or an inquisition or digging deep into the personal history of the applicant. It really is, boy, in the day we used to have welcome wagons, where the welcome wagon person would show up with a yardstick and a cookie and like discount tickets to the dry cleaners when we first moved to a neighborhood. They don't exist anymore, but I don't think they do. But that sort of concept is what we're having in mind here, and the chief was very amenable to having that happen if the committee wanted to continue along this line. And I think it'd be positive. I think you all would. I think it would be great for the applicant to realize that there are people that are dedicated to trying to affect the way public safety is being performed in this city, and also to get a better understanding of what you think about how public safety is going from your perch, which is a different perch than the business owner that they may meet, or the social worker that they may meet, or the probation officer that they may meet, or a lot of internal folks that they're going to be meeting at the department. So that's recommendation 2. And I think first time we made a recommendation like this, but I think we're thinking about doing it in a lot of other jurisdictions. So with that, I'll let you anything else.
I'm just wondering why the yardstick?
Because when you move in, you don't necessarily have your.
And you have to
There's a lot of
measure
things to
whether your
measure.
furniture is gonna fit in your room.
Yeah, you gotta measure the artwork on your walls have to be,
I feel like I learned something. Thank you.
you can't even buy art.
Well, and certainly thank you all for your attention and your patience, and we welcome any follow-up questions that you have, obviously.
Thank you, both of you, for your work and your deep dive into what I think we all understand are important aspects of the administration of our police department here. I have some general questions about this sort of landscape, and then I have to be honest that I have some remaining concerns about the 11th hour hiring incident that y'all overviewed. So just Mr. Connolly, I think you mentioned in your section of the overview that at least in the past there was a kind of a preference that the department had for lateral hires from other police departments. And so I'm kind of wondering if this preference kind of greenlit or fast-tracked perhaps other, applicants from other departments in the way that they were vetted or sort of considered in the hiring process.
Great question, and the answer is no, and I definitely should have said that there are advantages. To go back to Commissioner Escamilla Greenwald's point about the sponsor, they're turnkey ready in the sense of having their certification. They've been to the academy, so you don't have to worry about sponsoring them and waiting, 6 months for them to finish. But if they finish, that's a great point, Mike.
Yeah.
But absolutely, they put them through all of the same screening standards that a new hire would have.
Yeah, I thought so. I just wanted to confirm. And I heard sort of I can't remember which person I was talking about this, but with regard to diversity of our pool of sworn officers, and I know that in past discussions, when we talked about this as a commission, that I think the goal here is that having a more diverse sworn force, could develop better trust with a diverse populace. And I don't discount that, but I have to, I feel like I'm required to mention what I always mention in these conversations, that the data makes it really clear that there's not a direct link between a more diverse sworn force and better outcomes for those minority populations in terms of use of force and other things. I don't dispute the sort of aspect about developing better trust, but I just want to set it on the table in terms of the conversation that we shouldn't misunderstand that might lead to better sort of kinetic outcomes in terms of policing.
Can I interrupt?
Okay, yes, please.
I would agree with you on principle that the data is a little inconclusive. Diversity for diversity's sake is helpful. I would say, though, the data is very conclusive, or quite conclusive, with regard to one aspect, and that is women do not use as much force as men do. And that is something that the data has shown.
Thank you for pointing that out. And then, let's see, I have to also bring up what I know is, I say very sarcastically, but a favorite topic over at PD, and that's, sort of a meeting of the middle between your two recommendations, and that's, what we've discussed in different forms in the years of this commission, and that's civilian participation in the hiring process. And I know that wrinkles or ruffles a lot of feathers over at PD, and I can understand a lot of legitimate reasons why, in terms of confidentiality and sensitive information in the hiring process. But I feel sort of duty bound to try to push the envelope as far as we can in terms of perhaps members of the advisory board or members of this commission or other civilian Davis residents not affiliated with either body participating in the hiring process. If that's a very regulated, you have to ask this question, you can't say anything else, you are required to sign a form that you're sworn to never mention anything that happened in this interview, even if it's a very sort of tightly sort of guardrail sort of participation, I think that would be helpful. In addition to what you mentioned in the second recommendation about a sort of a civilian welcome wagon, so to speak, for our new hires. So I don't know if you have any additional thoughts beyond what we've discussed over the years in terms of civilian participation in the hiring process.
Chair Horton, I think that the one way I put it is, if we get some engagement, my experience is then you end up getting more engagement. And so if you can get your foot in the door with regard to coming up with principles and then having this welcoming event that the chief is agreeable to, maybe the next step would be to get more involved. And it does become complicated, and HR has to get involved, and you know that the questions have to be from a script, and in order to be fair and not subject to a lawsuit, you gotta ask questions the right way, every way, and so that gets a little bit clunky. I've done it, and so I know how clunky it can get, and how uninsightful it can sometimes get because of its, you can't do secondary questions in that context, et cetera. But that, that doesn't mean that it couldn't become a day when that could be part of the protocol as well. I'm not averse to it.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Horn. I do want to say at the beginning, thank you for the recommendations. I think that I have an HR background, so I understand all those limitations. And but I think it's a good start, to have a subcommittee work on potential questions that we would like to have asked or things that we want to have considered during the hiring process. I think that's a very good start. And as Chair Horton has mentioned, hopefully we get to the point where we can do some kind of a welcome, little welcome reception or something to new officers, just to welcome them and help them become familiar with the Police Accountability Commission. Let them know we welcome them. We want to hold them accountable, but we welcome them. And, we hope that they enjoy Davis. Davis is very unique when it comes to accountability. And so I'm hoping we can get to that point. But I want to say thank you for those recommendations.
Maybe coffee with the new cop.
Yeah. Oh, I like that.
Yeah,
Coffee
we-
with the new cop. It said it's coffee with the new cop.
Kind of like that.
I do want to circle back to my sort of concerns about the hiring incident. So, number one, I think, Stephen, you mentioned in your overview that and I completely agree that it's the department's intent, particularly the leadership of the chief and the deputy chief, to bring people on to our sworn force or to the department overall who are going to engage in that work in alignment with the community's values. I 100% understand and believe that that's what the intent was. But obviously, this incident sort of demonstrates that as much as we can have that intent, that there can be some things that slip through the cracks. And so, I hear what Mike, I think what you overviewed in terms of we're going to use multiple search engines now, and I can very much understand how that could have been helpful in this scenario. I don't know if it's, the fact that I'm a layperson, but I just remain concerned about the reliance on search engines, and, the sort of person's name coming up in a news article being how we figure out whether or not they were kind of involved in an incident of this kind. Were we talking about somebody getting roughed up, not in accordance with department or security company policy, but we're talking about, obviously, as everyone understands here, a death of somebody, and perhaps the solution is beyond this room, because I kind of, my mind sort of jumps to, well, why isn't there like a government database of like people who are involved with the death particularly? If it's something sub-death, maybe we, don't need a government database about that. But it seems like we should be able to rely on something a little bit more sturdy than a Bing search, to determine whether or not a potential hire was involved in the death of someone. Right. So again, I say that, with understanding that the solution is possibly beyond this room, but I still remain concerned, even with the fixes that you described, that something like this would we be certain couldn't happen in the future?
Yeah, unfortunately, no search is foolproof. Steve looked at the file before this all came about. We looked at it as part of our initial, and there was nothing there to suggest that there was anything untoward. The searches were all there, they came up negative. There was even I forgot to mention this, there was even a Nexus Lexis search, which is where you search for litigation and this was litigated. But he wasn't named as a defendant, so therefore he didn't come up in that search.
Yeah, and it's mentioned that there were no incidents with his service in the department at that point, and that's great. I worry what would have happened long term, had forces external to the police department not discovered that this was the case. So again, I understand that the high likelihood that the solution is beyond this room. But even with some of the fixes in place, I remain. I did have one question with regard to this in connection with everything. You mentioned, I believe that the department traditionally relies on the same contractor to do some of this vetting, if I understood correctly, and it has like a high degree of confidence in that person. I just want to confirm that this is the same individual who had engaged in the work with regard to this hire?
That's my understanding. Yeah.
Okay. Does the department remain highly confident in this individual?
Yes, and I think just what I would add to what Mike has said, I 100% appreciate the concerns, and Commissioner Griswold was saying, how did this not come? And it's hard to explain without getting into some of the sensitive confidential details of this person's background. We want to be respectful of him. I will tell you, I'm not sure what the image is, but there are overlapping, interlocking systems that are, they go out and they talk to former employers, they interview people. There's a lot of different things, places where you would have expected something to emerge that didn't. So it was a very, very unusual situation. And is there a 100% guarantee that tweaking the search engine is going to keep, Haley's Comet from striking again? No. But I think all you can do is just continue to refine with the information that is available to you, and I think the department's committed to doing that. And by the way, my understanding from the chief is that he has had outreach from a lot of other law enforcement agencies who were like, wow, this is a very sobering case, and what are the learning lessons? Do we need to be doing anything different? So I think everybody's responding to it as this was a very significant event that we want to try to adjust to accordingly.
And I should say, in this setting, what I have said already on social media, that I do salute, the department's sort of fast action in response to this once it became, once it rose to their attention. I do think that, they responded to it in the appropriate way.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to say, Chair Burton, is that I commend Chief Vitale for acting quickly. Not all departments in different cities would have done that. And he took full responsibility and acted quickly, and I commend him for that. And I just think that speaks to his leadership.
I would agree with you. I know chiefs that would have still kept this person.
What a world. Chiefs would have still, I'm from Los Angeles, and I know, anyway, no. Anyway, other questions, comments?
I'm curious about what are next steps if, on the two recommendations, of course, if, I don't know, we need to have a separate conversation to say if we're interested in moving forward, how do we begin that process?
I'm sorry, just procedurally, I think after public comment, we can consider perhaps forming a subcommittee to engage in some of that work. But I don't want us to get on the other side. I want us to get on the other side of public comment to do that. Mike, did you have more?
No.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Public comment on this item. Our new best friend, welcome.
Yeah, I would like to say that being on CAB, I know that when the deputy chief was being hired, that I actually was, I don't know how many other people, but there was an interview from someone who lives in Roseville had called up to ask what qualities would we be interested in a deputy chief. I didn't have a lot because it was sort of an area that I'm not clear of. And I too have HR background. But that being said, the other thing is I do know that at least one of the CAB members was on the hiring committee. So they are still doing some work. It could certainly be increased, but they are doing some. So there is some going on.
Thank you for sharing that. See, it's great that we have such a diversity of experience on our city commissions, right? Any other comments or follow-up questions to our two auditors? Okay, so as I suggested a second ago, I think it would be good for us to form a subcommittee to one, I don't know how I'm looking on the agenda, like, it's actually, I'm sorry, Kelly, can we move to the recommendations? Yeah, I think it would be good for us to form a subcommittee to begin some of the work to, on recommendation number 1 in terms of drafting. And Mike, you offered your assistance there, and I hope you will continue to have us call on you for advice there. And then also, with regard to, we wouldn't really need to create something as concrete for recommendation number 2, but perhaps to, particularly since the chief is already on board with this idea, to outline at least what we would like to have. I'm going to go ahead and coin coffee with the new cop. What we would want that process or that engagement to look like from the commission. Anyone want to volunteer themselves for such a subcommittee? Commissioner Escamilla Greenwald, anyone else? All right.
Sorry, I just missed who it was. So.
Oh, Commissioner Escamilla Greenwald, Vice Chair Griswold. I don't know if we could have a person, well, she's been appointed, right?
She's been appointed,
Yes.
so after July 1, sure.
Yes.
Yes, even if we got her on.
Right, all right. So those are our members. Yes, go ahead.
Unless we thought anybody not here would want to join, if one of us wanted to
Well, they lost
offer
out.
to them.
Any other comments? Anyone, I think this would be good to give direction to the subcommittee. I guess it's only would be most relevant for myself and Commissioner Myers, who are not on the subcommittee, but I think y'all have heard, enough of the conversation here. I'll speak for myself in that I think it would be good to have an outline for what we want to achieve in recommendation number 2, and similarly, some outlining of what we think we would want to prioritize in recommendation number 1. And I hope we can have your help in figuring out how to suggest what the prioritization of it is, how you sort of, if we're going to list sort of 7 items, so to speak, if there's an equality in the candidates between, the first 3, how do we, sort of use that to weed through the candidates in an orderly fashion. Anyway, Commissioner Myers, want to give any further direction to our valiant committee? All right, we will move on to, let's see if I can keep up here. 7A, our military equipment annual review. Kelly, did you have a summary? Yes. While we're getting this ready, I'll just again call Commissioner's attention to the email that we received on this topic, I think just shortly after noon today.
Okay, so this is the annual review for the military equipment ordinance. You may recall in the beginning of the year, I think, we had a meeting over at the Senior Center where the department was requesting to add rifles, I believe, to the list of approved pieces of equipment. So military equipment, as is outlined in the staff report that's in your packet, is defined by the state. Some of it is equipment that you would sort of traditionally think of as being military, and other pieces of equipment may be equipment that you wouldn't necessarily think automatically military. So for me, that would be like drones. I don't think of that as being overtly military, but it is on the list. Any pieces of equipment that the city law enforcement has that it wishes to use that fall into this category must go through this military equipment ordinance review. It's very similar to the surveillance technology, except this one is required by the state now. the surveillance technologies are a local requirement. And there is overlap, so some of the pieces of equipment are in both places. So if it feels like you've already been here, you know, you have a little bit. The council is required to review and decide what they want to do each year with the military equipment. For Davis, the equipment includes an armored rescue vehicle, drones, chemical agent and smoke canisters, flashbangs, kinetic energy and impact munitions, rifles, and breaching tools. So that is the city's list. If you looked at the staff report, you would notice some track changes in a couple of the areas in the chemical agent and smoke canisters, and then also in the noise flash diversionary devices. So there's nothing that is a new type of thing that's being requested, but essentially the manufacturer, we would be using a different manufacturer. The old equipment is old and no longer able to be used by that particular manufacturer, so we switched to a different manufacturer for the same, essentially the same thing. So if you were going to make an analogy, it's Ford versus Chevy, both cars that get you from point A to point B. The council, in order to adopt the military equipment ordinance, must have certain findings that they are able to produce or suggest, and those would be that the equipment is necessary, that it is intended to safeguard the public, that it is cost effective, and that if it's an existing piece of equipment, that it had a prior conforming usage, basically. If they can show those, then they have ability to re-up the equipment for the following year, or they can choose not to if they want. This item is actually on the council's agenda for tomorrow evening. And so what we're asking the commission tonight is for you to weigh in on whatever your thoughts are or questions you may have. We can either take that and relay that to the council tomorrow night, staff can do that, or if you prefer, you can certainly designate one of you to come to the council meeting. Everybody loves to do that, and speak during that item on behalf of the commission. And that's up to what you guys prefer to do. I'll conclude with that, and I will attempt to answer any questions, but we'll see how far I can go on that.
Questions, comments from the commission?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm going to refer to it as an MRAP, but I know it's not the full-fledged MRAP that they attempted to bring before. It is now called the Armored Rescue Vehicle, ARV. Okay.
ARV.
I'm curious to know how many times over the years, last year, has the ARV been used? And what is the cost for maintaining the ARV? Oh,
So I think, let me see if I can, I'm not sure how quickly I can navigate to it, but if you give me a
I thought I
minute.
saw it there, but I just don't have it.
Page 32.
On page 32, it says it's $10,000 a year maintenance cost after the $137,750 initial purchase.
Sorry, I'm gonna make you all dizzy. Oh, you know what, I only pulled up the staff report, I need the full thing. Elizabeth, you're looking in the actual packet, the commission packet. Oh, page, let me try that one. There we go.
What page is that?
So it's page 32 of your packet, and you can see kind of some information there that perhaps answers your question. There's an initial cost to purchase here,
$137,000.
and then there's the annual cost. So just like your car, there's a cost to purchase, and then there's the annual cost to operate. And so this vehicle is, it looks more car-like than tank-like. So the MRAP looked like a tank. This looks more like a van. Yeah, like an Amazon van.
I'll just say, you know, I continue to, you know, you laid out the findings that the council needs to make with regard to each of these items. I continue to have concerns with regard to the armored rescue vehicle, with regard to both the necessity and the cost effectiveness, you know, aspect of that. I think, I think the reasoning in terms of necessity, in my recollection from the council meeting when that was originally considered, I think fairly early in the life of this commission, but in my view, didn't fully substantiate an argument that this was necessary in the community of Davis for the purposes of Davis policing. And so if you know, I know we need to sort of figure out how we want to transmit our concerns, comments, questions to council for their meeting tomorrow, but that remains one of my concerns, as it has been since the city originally made this authorization.
Yeah, and the initial cost of $137,000 and then $10,000 annually to maintain. And it says in the report that the life expectancy of it is 20 years. So we're talking about $200,000 over the you know, the term life of the vehicle. Just seems like that's money that could be better used for a city like Davis. It doesn't seem like it's necessary for a city like Davis.
I just want to raise a voice of dissent on that. We hope that MRAP, or whatever you call this, would never have to be used. So I hope that the money is spent and it sits in the parking lot the whole time. But it's the critical incident that we don't want to have happen, where this is going to save officers' lives and citizens' lives. And so I'm strongly in favor of keeping this in its toned down van-like configuration, which is more suitable in Davis. So I think we would be dead wrong to recommend against its continued maintenance and possession by the police department. You know, you hope you never have to use a flashbang grenade too, but when you need it, you need to be able to send somebody to get it. You need to send, it's the same thing with this thing. If you need it, you gotta have it.
I 100% agree that if we're going to spend the money, that I do hope that it sits in a garage somewhere and is never used, and that there never you know, occurs a circumstance where PD feels like it's necessary. I do worry though with the, you know, I feel like there's a large expanse of things that you could justify with the thought of, well, maybe it might be necessary at some point, and we want to be able to call upon its usage at a certain point if we need it. I feel like you could justify an MRAP, you know, just a regular old MRAP with that argument. And so I worry what that could get to. I understand that there's a whole lot of dangerous things that we can't necessarily foresee as a community. Again, I think you could justify a whole lot of things that might not necessarily be appropriate for the community from that standpoint.
And I think it's interesting we're bringing up this notion of we hope it's never necessary. And on page 21, it has these 4 bullet points, for lack of a better word. The City Council is required to consider the proposed military equipment policy in open session and may approve the policy only if it makes the following findings. And the first one is the military equipment is necessary because there's no reasonable alternative that can achieve the same objective of officer and civilian safety. So, I mean, that's the standard by which the council is supposed to consider whether to approve it. Is it actually necessary? And if we're all talking about, like, well, ideally it's not necessary, that kind of, to me, is giving us an answer right there. And, I mean, I'm sure you could say, like, you know, there's no reasonable alternative. Well, reasonable, I mean, I think that becomes the second objective word. Like, is it reasonable? Again, we could build, like, you know, some sort of thing that no one could ever be harmed here, but then again, you go down to the other, where the other things are supposed to be considered, the cost effectiveness, safeguarding the public's welfare, safety, civil rights, civil liberties, all these things need to come into play as factors. So how necessary is a purchase like an ARV? I don't know that it would be so reasonable.
Other comments, questions? Let's see, do folks have thoughts about how we want to share any additional thoughts, but also the ones that have just been expressed with, I'm a weirdo, so of course I'll be there tomorrow evening. Did anyone want to make maybe, I'm not suggesting this, but did anyone want to do anything beyond just having some of us present tomorrow? We don't
I
have
think
to.
somehow sharing our concerns, the diversity of concerns, and even, one of our commissioners that does approve, but also those of us that don't, sharing that with council. There's this diversity of concerns and an agreement to having it.
And just to, as a person who's likely to have to verbally make that argument, I just want to be clear that at least what I've heard in this conversation is that there seems to be a concern amongst at least three of us that the argument for necessity hasn't been fully made with regard to the armored rescue vehicle, right? And that in pursuant to what you said, Cecilia, in terms of making sure that we're including all the conversation, Commissioner Myers, that there's, a possible necessity for this vehicle and equipment at some point. And
It's
so
not possible, don't use the word possible if you attribute it to me, this is necessary equipment.
He said it's necessary. I won't put words in his mouth, but he did say necessary, but he hopes we never have to use it.
It's not,
Yeah.
yeah, if you talk to the commission, don't attribute the word possibly necessary, this is necessary equipment. The judgment made by people who are much better qualified to make these decisions than you and I, who decided that this is necessary for the safety of our community. So I would like my views to be very clear. This is not possibly necessary, this is necessary equipment that the city council should approve and continue to fund.
yeah, that's why I sought clarification. Make sure I said it right. Okay, anyway, let's public comment on this. Do we already do public comment? Or am I- Okay, having a fever dream. Let's see, any further comment from the commission on this item?
About the ARV or?
No, about the whole review of the various, as Kelly outlined them, half a dozen or so, or 5 or so, so labeled military pieces of equipment utilized by DPD.
I have expressed that I'm not in favor of the purchase of the ARV, but I would say I'm more strongly not in favor of, can we talk more about all of these specific rifles? I'd like to hear more information about what kinds of firearms do they already have? Are these all replacements? Is this are these upgrades? What's the difference between the impact of these as military grade versus other firearms that already have? I have a lot of questions, and there's just so many, it almost gets overwhelming, we can't even address them. I have no idea about the cost effectiveness compared to other types. As Commissioner Myers brings up, yes, people who are making this list have much more information about these kinds of things than we do, but I don't even know how to address those without more information.
Yeah, I hope in tomorrow's presentation there's going to be, because I as a person with a political science degree, I have no idea how to make the is this the best equipment relative to other alternatives sort of assessment, particularly with regard to the rifles. I think there's maybe a community values assessment that you can make with regard to the ARV and sort of other sort of very large, kind of easier to understand bits of equipment. But yeah, I hope that there's going to be information in tomorrow's presentation about like a comparative assessment, or an argument as to why these are sort of better for DPD to have for DPD's needs relative to other rifles, or perhaps if that is not a part of the presentation, hopefully very learned council members will ask these questions during their opportunities in the discussion. But yeah, I would also, I think it would be helpful to, I think it's necessary, number one, just to make the findings that Kelly mentioned earlier to sort of make that comparative assessment with regard to the rifles.
Yeah, how many do they already have? Why these? Why military grade? Why more? I just don't feel like there's enough information here at all.
And I know when we considered the drone slash rifle issue, I can't recall if that was in November or December of last year, but I think as Kelly mentioned, we were over in the senior center, and I knew at that point that was a discussion about replacement rifles. So I know at least those, that number of them were what the council was authorizing, sort of a replacement of, I almost want to say spoiled, right? Rifles. Anyway, other questions, comments with regard to the other pieces of equipment? Okay. All right, so then any other thoughts?
I would just say, I mean, the same questions are coming up for me regarding all of them. And I'm trying to kind of like flip back to page 21 around like, these are the things that the council is supposed to be considering against, whether it's necessary, there's no reasonable alternative. Balancing, safeguarding public welfare, safety, civil rights, and civil liberties, whether it's cost effective, and how it complies with the military equipment use policy. And I feel like then there's like this long list of stuff that they want, but I don't feel like we have the information to run these items through these 4 factors to come out with some sort of legitimate consideration or recommendation to them. So I hope the council gets more information. I doubt there's going to be more. I mean, this is a very extensive report, but to me, I'm still finding it lacking.
Then, Kelly, I have a procedural question. What's the timeline? What's the timeline that the council has in terms of their consideration of this? You said this was unlike the surveillance technology ordinance, this is a state law mandated thing. So is there a state mandated calendar in which the council needs to consider this?
It has to be done yearly. I assume that it's in line with the fiscal year. That's probably how the chief has set it up. So that would be the reason for council to consider it in June.
Okay. And then is this a sort of a one and done council consideration in terms of are they going to see this at any point beyond tomorrow's meeting?
Well, they would see it every year.
Well,
But for this year, for this particular one, they would not, unless they chose not to make a decision and wanted something to come back to them. So they could vote up, vote down, or ask for something to come back, I suppose.
Pending council decision, it would unlikely return to their agenda until next year.
So if they made a decision, then it would not return until, next year, or until a council member, asked for something to come back, or the department wanted to, much like with the rifle conversation, wanted to change something in the inventory.
Thank you. I just wanted everybody to be clear about what our timeline was. All right, I'll move us forward then if there's nothing further to our outreach. Go ahead.
I just quickly want to say I concur with Commissioner Griswold is that why military grade versus, it's not like Davis is a super unsafe community. Why do we have to go military grade? Are the guns that they have not, they're not, because it says in there in the report something like, because it can't be, I forget the exact wording is, but they're not in that grade. I'm like, why do we need military grade? Are we all of a sudden under some potential attack? I just don't see the justification for it, that's all.
Yeah, so just we need more information about what the necessary argument is. Commissioner Lyons?
Well, I think it's too late in the day, since this is coming before the city council, to, unless we want to ask the city council to postpone their decision on this and give us the opportunity to investigate it. There's certain basic things here that, I mean, the pistols that officers carry are self-defense weapons. Long guns are for offensive use. Long guns are much more accurate at long range. There are very good reasons why they want rifles. Virtually all police departments in the country equip their officers, at least some of their officers, with either shotguns or long guns. I'm just kind of amazed that we don't get it.
I don't want to speak for my two colleagues on either side, but I don't think, at least speaking for myself, I'm not making an argument that I don't think they're necessary. What I heard my colleagues either to my left and right and my own self thinking is, I just don't see the argument or the substantiation in the document that's in front of us. So I think
that's a fair point. That's a fair point.
yeah, and so I think what I'm planning on transmitting, and please correct me if this is not what y'all want to be transmitted, is that we hope in tomorrow's conversation with our very, I'll say eloquent police chief, who I'm sure will be very prepared to walk us through all of this tomorrow, can include in his presentation, or perhaps in response to some council members' questions, the information that I think he has readily available to him in answering some of the questions that have been presented here. I think, I assume, that he has an argument for why we need each one of those rifles relative to another one that could be of similar make out on the market. Kelly, did you have something?
Yeah, so what I'm going to explain to the chief and the city manager tomorrow is that what you said this evening, that the commission hopes that the council presentation will explain why the equipment is necessary and how the equipment meets the findings. Because I heard that as an overarching comment that whether or not you agree with what the equipment is, you believe more could be explained in terms of why it is necessary or believed to be necessary, and how it meets those different 4 bullet points. Is that?
Yes.
Does that, okay, I think there's consensus on at least that piece.
I would also ask for clarification of what they already have. Like, is this all like
Particularly
everything's,
rifles.
yes, is everything being completely replaced, or is this an addition?
So the only things that would be new would be the replacements for, let me scroll down a little bit, find the right mouse here. The replacements for those items that have to have a new manufacturer now. Everything else already exists in the inventory.
I'm sorry, I'm still confused. Specifically around the rifles, all of these are to replace? Or
This is a general authorization, right, for all of the equipment that
Yes. We have the equipment, we have to seek authorization in order to be able to use the equipment. If tomorrow council said, no, we don't want to be authorized the rifles, for an example, then our police department would not be authorized to use those pieces of equipment. And, they might sell them as surplus property, or maybe they lock them in a closet until next year. I'm not sure exactly what would happen at that point. But they wouldn't have authorization to use them.
So just I don't know if it clarifies the question that you're asking. I think this is just all of the stuff that they currently have right now, right?
Yes.
Okay, in terms of the rifles.
Yeah.
so they already have everything?
Yes, they do.
So the things that are in track changes here in red, so these are the items that they have a Chevy, they'll need to get a Ford, or vice versa. Because they need to change the manufacturer. It's the same equipment, but a different manufacturer. So it's just those items. Everything else is the same, but regardless, in order to use any of it, they need authorization. Does that help clarify? Okay.
Any further questions, comments? All right. Now taking us back to 7B, discussion of our fall outreach event. Fall is seemingly 15 minutes from now. I really just want to, because I don't know if we've done this previously, just talk about, or just offer up an opportunity if commission members have suggestions for what the, we often have a theme of what the outreach event is each year. Last year it was property rights, oh goodness. Property crime, goodness, that would have been a rough commission outreach event. But, we've done Know Your Rights outreach events. The very first one that we did in 2019 was just about the commission, introducing people to Mike. So what's sort of a general all-purpose outreach event. Councilmember Partito?
Well, as I was listening to the recommendations earlier, I thought it would be great to do an outreach for the community around what they would like to see as a list of new hire questions, or as we're creating that, I think, it would be really great to engage the entire community around that.
Thank you. Other thoughts, suggestions?
I would like to say, I really like that idea because it engages the community and at the same time introduces the community even more to the Police Accountability Commission and to officers as well as those that may be joining the force. I like that idea a lot.
It is a good idea, thank you. Another thing I've been thinking about is, one of the things we've had on our, like on page 46 for a long time, items requested by commissioners to be considered long range. This notion of, in other communities where there's a notion of a community nonviolent call for service, and sort of a community-wide conversation around looking at different models of what that looks like in other places, how to deal with mental health concerns, without having an armed police response that can often escalate situations, calls that might go to the police, which are actually like wasting their time. They could go to other agencies, they could go to, I know we have things set up with social workers, but maybe it's not the most effective system right now. A broader conversation around how to respond to nonviolent calls for service in a holistic way.
I remember in one previous year there was a conversation about whether or not the theme that year should be, forgetting the term. Well, no, so you're kind of talking about response to public safety issues that, sort of arise in the community, and goodness, there's a term, but I'm forgetting what it is, but it's when people sort of,
Co-responder?
No. When people sort of, as a result of perhaps some biases, end up erroneously calling the police. There's a term for it, and I don't know why I'm blanking on it right now. But this was a big issue a couple years ago because of an incident in the community, I feel like over in East Davis. And we ended up not doing that because I think we felt like it was more in the vein of what Human Relations Commission should do, because it was more about educating the community about certain biases that could be present when they. I can't recall exactly, but anyway, it sort of reminds me of that we could have some opportunities to share resources and education with folks about, as you kind of spoke to, alternatives to sort of calling 911 in response to particularly like a mental health or like a social public safety issue. Well, I mean, we have you brought up the co-responder model, and it's a thing that, we've been paying attention to as a commission and trying to advocate for, the expansion of. Anyway, there seems like I just wanted to bring that up in terms of there could be multiple dimensions to that. Councilman?
Bias by proxy.
There we go. Yeah. Yes. Bias.
Bias by proxy.
Other thoughts about themes for the 2024 Police Accountability Commission outreach event? Good suggestions all around. I'll go to public comment on this item if there are any. And then back to our lovely commission. commission, any final comments on this? I know I'm the only member of this subcommittee here, so I'll try to transmit these lovely ideas to our colleagues, Commissioner Canning and Sherman. Any final comments here? Yes.
If you leave the meeting tonight, go to sleep, wake up at 3 in the morning and think of a great idea, can you just email that to me? And I'll make sure the subcommittee gets that.
Yes, please do. We will need your assistance there. Alrighty, taking it over to item 8, long-range calendar, upcoming meeting dates, potential agenda items. Anyone have any suggestions for future items? I have one now, I'm blanking on what it is.
I just want to once again make sure, so July 1st is Monday, July 1st, obviously the same week of July 4th. Making sure that everybody will be here and we can have a meeting then. If you know that you have any plans that will take you out of town or away and you're unable to make it, please let me know so we make sure that we have a quorum.
Yes. Y'all want to plan a meeting and everybody's gone. And I did recall what I wanted to mention or hope to have the consent of my colleagues on a future agenda item. I mentioned in announcements, the degree to which folks in the LGBTQ plus community can be sort of victims of a misplaced criminal justice and particularly incarceration system. My colleague, as always, brought up an important point with regard to the degree to which folks in that community folks in that community sometimes experience violence and threats from civilian folks in our community. And Gloria, before you got here, I was sharing some of our fun experiences over the weekend with our best friend and spiritual confidant. It makes me think about the degree to which, again, folks in this community, because they are sometimes targets for violence and threats to their public safety, need to really be able to rely on calling the police when that public safety is threatened. And so I know this has been sort of an evolving conversation and topic in the community. I think you had some conversations earlier today about this, but some public-facing information about what folks in our community should do should they feel they are under threat, has unfortunately become a recurring incident in the past couple of years. But yeah, I would like to see if commission colleagues would also like to see something like that on our agenda, perhaps in July, but perhaps in a future meeting.
I think it's interesting, like in terms of the way of bringing that up, both as you began at the beginning of the meeting, the idea that sometimes folks in the LGBTQ plus community are not treated so well by the police, but then also by community members. And then I think that kind of what I was bringing up is the potential. It's a plug for the type of meeting as an outreach meeting in the fall. If then the idea is, oh, call the police and they're going to take care of you, and maybe they will, maybe they won't. And so the idea of having other alternatives and having that broader conversation with our large community around what are times when other folks can show up, what are times when it's not necessarily the police's job, when they're overburdened by getting called for this, that, and the other, where we can have better, more effective ways of responding. So that's just what kind of came full circle in my mind.
I know that other parts of the community, including the school board, when there have been incidents, hate incidents towards certain groups, and also our LGBTQ plus community, that the police department has been very responsive to the district and quickly responds to make sure that everyone's okay. And they work with the city to, get rid of any kind of degrading graffiti that is aimed either at African Americans. There has been some. There's been anti-Semitic comments, and there have been, unfortunately, LGBTQ plus. And I would say the department has been very responsive in those situations. Thank you.
Go ahead. No, yeah, go ahead.
So I would just say that in the city of Davis, there will be no, maybe they will, maybe they won't. They will be. And I think that this commission is here for that reason. And so I understand that, that this is a question for the LGBTQ plus community, and I don't make light of that. But, I want for us to make a commitment as a city and a community that when the police are called to respond to any citizen, that they will behave the way that they should. And I think that this is why we're here. And I know that we can't guarantee that, but we're gonna do our darndest to.
A couple of quick things. One, you sort of jogged my memory about something. I was at the Yolo County Juneteenth event over just yesterday. I think blends together. But I was talking with someone there about how I think some of our discrimination issues, hate incidents, have a particularly harsh impact on our children in this community. It's very rare that an adult black person is going to be called the N-word in the city of Davis, but it unfortunately happens with too far of a frequency to black kids in DGUSD schools right here, in our community. And so it makes me think about, I want to broaden actually what I just said earlier with specific respect to the LGBT Q plus community, because I think, as I mentioned just a second ago, I think that community certainly needs to be able to call up, upon the police in certain circumstances. I think obviously other, minority communities, including ethnic minorities, need to be able to rely on that as well. Then kind of connecting, Councilmember Partita, what you said and what you said a moment ago, I am, I'm a kind of a supporter of all of the above strategy in terms of, public safety response, and that I'm on this commission largely because I do support, as you do, expanding alternatives to, community response to public safety issues. But I do think it's a core mandate of this commission to make sure that, absent that queer folks and black folks and all kind of unhoused folks are able to call upon, the police, again, absent until we, reach a day where such alternatives are present and accessible in the community. But other comments on future agenda items? Okay, public comment on this item. Taking us back, anyone want to make a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Is there a second? With enthusiasm. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposition, any abstentions? All right, meeting adjourned at 8:25, 5 minutes early. All righty. Right, yes. Well, we look forward to welcoming you. I'm glad that we got to meet you.
Thank you for coming